Hello and welcome to Mr. and Mrs. Social Studies. My name is Sarah, and as we gradually transition back into the school year, I thought it was an important time for us to talk about the essential forms that you need as a teacher, especially at the secondary level. You see, it's very fun to think about how you want to decorate your classroom and focus more on, that student side of stuff when we start the year. But having really strong systems in place for how you keep track of your files or how you sort out different situations that are happening, you just keep records of things, setting yourself up for success in that way is going to last you for a really long time. And I think a lot of these are actually good habits that we can get into as teachers. And so with this, I wanted to talk about all of the essential forms, at least from my own experience teaching middle school, that can help you have a really positive year. We'll also go through some different systems and setups you can have around your classroom to make it even more simple. With that being said, some of these I do have like example forms of what I've used. If you do want access to any of the things that I'm referring to, I will have every relevant link linked in the description field of this video. Let's begin. The first and absolutely most important form, which I do not have one with me because it's just full of student names, is to have some sort of grading document. You can print out a grading sheet from most online grade books, so that's a really great option. But what I actually wanted to do was to have all the students' names I taught, about 130 kids, on one sheet of paper with a space where I could write something in if needed. And what I loved about that sheet was if I was doing something where I was checking assignments in during the day, collecting feedback as I listened to a presentation or something like that, I wanted to have all of the grades on one sheet. And I had it on a clipboard. So definitely, if you don't have clipboards, there are amazing clipboards out there just to get a set of them, just to have them for various purposes. But having that sheet, it had all the kids' names. I did teach 4 different classes that were 65 minutes long each. I just made a giant table. I had 8 columns because there was a column for each class and then a column next to it where I could fill in a score for something. And then I just typed out all of the kids' names, just their first name to save space. And it was an amazing way that I could quickly put in grades, especially when you have all of them on a sheet. So that was something I highly recommended. Another version would be to just take whatever the basic grading printout is that's provided, have some blank lines for future assignments, and then staple them together in a packet for each of your classes. So obviously I can't show you that because that would just be student names, but highly recommend that. Now let's get into lesson planning. You're going to want to decide where you plan your lessons. I personally have always been more of a digital planner, so I wouldn't necessarily opt for like one of those, booklet planners. My whole theory is if you write it all out in a planner, you're going to have to rewrite it in the future. Whereas if you have digital copies, you could just look back at your digital ones and make adjustments and see what you did the year before. Now I do have a printed one here with me, but there's a digital version of this. But basically, if I'm doing some planning for lessons, I want to do a big picture for the week. What are we doing each day of the week? And then you break it down, standards, objectives, actual lesson activities. So that's really important to have there for each day of the week. And then one thing that I always make sure I include, I put a spot on here at the bottom, any changes to make for next year. I'm sure this is something you've thought about too, but as you teach certain things, you realize, oh, I don't like the way this is going. Let me make this small change. Or maybe you see a typo, or there's just a certain idea you have you want to add in. But what happens when we wait a whole year until you need that item again? You maybe forgot about it until you're actually reliving it again. So if we can keep track somewhere of the changes that we want to make, even if we're not making the changes right away, we're ready for next year and we won't have to keep making the same mistakes over again. As a history teacher, we don't want to keep repeating our mistakes. It's like the history thing. So keeping track is really helpful. Also, as we get into a lot of different forms, how I prefer to organize them is to have a simple crate like this. You don't have to use like a filing cabinet. This would just sit behind my desk, and each of these categories has one of those little hanging file folders. This was just a set of some recycled ones I got off Amazon. And I just have them set up with all the different tabs I need. It keeps it really simple to find what you need. So any of these types of files I'll be going over with, I would just keep in these file folders. Now let's talk to-do list. For a while, I was mostly keeping track of my to-do list on Post-it notes. Sometimes I would dabble with an online thing, but I really found I preferred paper versions of to-do lists. But half the time I would write the same things on my to-do list every day. And I thought, I'm wasting time by writing these out, and I also could be forgetting something. So last year was the first year I actually used a typed up template. Now on this sheet of paper here, I've got all 5 days of the week, and they've got similar tasks. So for me, common tasks included submitting attendance, updating homework log, make parent contact, respond to emails, complete student behavior logs, plan tomorrow's lesson, make copies, grade assignments, update gradebook, update board, prepare warm-up activity, complete office tasks, complete any required forms and paperwork, attend meetings, tidy up desk. Always try to end with a clean desk. So that's a lot of different tasks to have to write down. And the good news is you don't have to do all of these things every day. But what I liked about actually having a form that I had my common tasks typed up is that it made it easy for me to not have to think, okay, what else did I have to do? Because teacher brain is real. There's hundreds of things on your mind at a given time, and it's really tough to keep organized. So this was really helpful for me. You could totally make a version yourself with your common tasks, or if this sounds like your tasks, you're welcome to check it out. But that has been a lifesaver to me, keeping me on track with various tasks. A couple basic forms that can be helpful. Class sign-out sheet. This was one of those uses of a clipboard. I would simply have a command hook the clipboard to the door, have several copies of these double-sided, and then I would take a pen, tie a ribbon around it, and then attach it to the top of the clipboard so no one stole the pen. And it worked pretty well. You ask the kids for their name, the date, the location, and the time they're out and the time they're back in. And this is important, number one, just so you do have a record of where your kids are if they are leaving, but also you can use this to kind of cross-check with other teachers and say, okay, it looks like this particular student's leaving to go to the bathroom in everyone's class. Either that's a medical issue or this is a class avoidance issue and we need to get to the bottom of it. It also could be, wow, this person's really missing a lot of class, of my class. Maybe they're leaving the classroom every day for 10 minutes. What's going on here? So you can use it to help you figure out what is the best decision going forward. Also, parent contact, keeping track of that's very important as well, whether it is at conferences or emails, phone calls, trying to even balance out positive versus negative parent contact. Sometimes parent contact defaults to a little bit more negative stuff, but making the positive phone calls are a lot more fun. And in the last several years, I have been required to turn in my records of parent contacts, and it's always kind of awkward if your administrator asks for that and you weren't actually keeping record. Then you have to go back through and try to piece things together. It's just easier to have a plan to start. You also might think, well, I don't need something like this yet, but last year I had to give it attention on the first day of school. So, you have to be ready just in case. Speaking of behavior issues, we've got a student behavior log. This is a great option to keep track and document those student behaviors. This comes into play a lot at those behavior meetings when people want to know what has happened. And if you haven't documented things, number one, you've probably forgotten half of the stuff that happened just because there's so much always. But then it's also just really nice to have actual proof, like here. This is what happened, and this is when it happened. And then if we're trying to make better decisions to help a student, we actually know what's going on. So student behavior log is very important, and also this one can be helpful digitally. I've got digital forms for that. Now let's get into if you do a warm-up activity with your students. Now with Bellwork or a bell ringer activity, I go back and forth on whether it's better to have it on a sheet of paper or in student notebooks. I've done it both ways. I like student notebooks because it does support accountability, because the kids need to bring their notebook, or in my case, I had some extra bins that the students stored their notebooks in class. However, some students unfortunately lost notebooks, or we had several notebooks in class that people didn't really know who they belonged to. There was no names, maybe just one day of Bellwork in them. So that sometimes was a little unclear, as well as sometimes the notebooks can get destroyed during the year. So it sometimes can be a trickier thing. I've also used papers in the past. I think ultimately I do still prefer using the notebook just because it does put more responsibility on the students, and then I'm not having to make as many copies for students. But having the form is a really helpful organizational tool for many students. So you really have to decide what you want. I know on this form I did include a spot for gratitude as well, so students can practice a little daily gratitude and think of something that they're grateful for in addition to doing whatever that first assignment is. Moving right along, let's say you are absent and you have a sub. Has it ever happened to you that you get back and there was a sub there, but there's literally no feedback anywhere? There's like no actual proof that a sub was there, but you assume they were because, there's not anything crazy that happened. That is so frustrating because then you just have to figure out from the kids what happened, but you always don't know if you're getting the full story. So I've got this substitute report form, and I think this is super important since once I started implementing this and having a spot for subs to give a grade to each of my classes, it made such a difference, and I always had feedback. Even if the sub left no comments besides whatever the letter grade was for the class, that's still so helpful because, okay, the sub gave them an A, it must have been a smooth class, or they have a B or C. That makes sense, these students tend to be a little chatty, or if you have a D or an F, obviously something happened that wasn't ideal. But having a form like this just gives me so much peace of mind, and I think it's a fairly easy thing for a sub to do to decide, okay, let me just give it a quick grade. They could leave comments if they want, and I think this can really help you transition back into teaching after the sub was there. But how about when your students aren't there and absent work? Obviously, everyone has their own approach. If you've got a go-to spot or thing that happens when a kid is absent, that's going to make it easier for them to know what to expect to catch up. It kind of gets into the decision of how much do you do versus how much do the kids do and how autonomous they need to be. I did teach 8th grade last year, so mine were on the more autonomous end, and I did not personally use these forms much. But if you have younger students, this can be very helpful, especially Jake teaches 6th grade, so this is really important for that grade level. So there's two forms here. There is the full page form as well as the half page form. I think the half page form is often enough. It just breaks down what you did in class that day as well as any essential homework. This can easily be stapled to a handout. Let's say if you have to send homework down to the office. And it also has a spot where you write down what class it is. There's also a spot in the form where if the student has questions, how they can get a hold of you. So I think that can be a helpful system. Of course, there are other options. Sometimes these things can be posted on a school website, so there may already be things in place. But sometimes it's not as clear as just like what's the homework, but what do we do during class? How do I make that up? What steps do I take as a student to catch up with that? So that's another thing to keep in mind. This is also a great task that if you've got classroom jobs that a student could help with, like an absent coordinator. Now let's say students need to go to other areas around the school. It's helpful for them to have a pass. So these are just some basic pass templates. This is just a black and white version since real talk, most schools don't provide color printing, or at least the schools that I've worked at haven't provided color printing. An easy way to use these passes would be to make the lanyard passes. Cut these out, laminate them, then hole punch it, attach a lanyard, and that is an easy pass option if students are carrying those larger passes. But if not, if they're carrying smaller passes, I always hated writing like little post-it notes last minute. So I've got these tardy slips here. So if a student's going to be late to another class, they're finishing a test or something for your class, and they're going to be late, that's an option, as well as like a similar hall pass kind of option too. Now let's get into some positive incentives like different rewards. There's a variety of different options that we can do, and these can be fun prizes. Now I admit, I'm definitely pretty cheap and frugal. I don't really want to buy junky stuff or junky toy prizes. That's just not my thing, and I've never done that. Also, a lot of schools don't allow food or other treats and candy anymore, which I do support because it can get kind of expensive. Obviously, there's different medical issues that happen, and it's also not really a super healthy choice. Of course, I love a good treat here and there, but candy's not really a great idea for a prize either. So what kind of prizes do you give to middle school students or secondary students? Homework Pass has been a go-to of mine. I also have versions here that allow for students to receive some extra credit, as well as other reward coupons, letting a student listen to their own music during class with headphones, letting a student drop a low test or quiz score, letting students choose their seat for a day. I've got a collection of 10 common ones that do work well for middle school students. One other form that I have here is my Not Prepared tickets. This was something I tried out this past year and absolutely loved it. I would never go back. Basically, I was frustrated because I knew students had supplies. It wasn't an issue of certain students not having them, and if that was the case, I could have provided them, but they just deliberately chose not to show up with their supplies. Or sometimes you'd see wasteful behaviors, like students purposely having a pencil and breaking it just to be funny. So I implemented my Not Prepared tickets and policy this past year, and it went so incredibly well. Basically, students had to bring any of their essentials every day to class. If they did not have their essentials, they did earn a tally. And if they did earn 3 tallies during that month, after they received that 3rd tally, they would receive a detention. I would give 1 of these out per quarter, just to give them that extra chance. If they didn't have them, they could also use this for extra credit. And I really didn't have to give too many detentions. What I saw is because I set my expectations higher, my students rose to the challenge. And it was actually interesting. I had told another teacher in my building at the end of the previous year that I was going to implement this policy, and she was like, wow, that seems a little too strict. I don't think that's a good idea. And I said, well, I'll give it a try and see what happens. And it was ironic because it worked so well in my class. There's actually a conversation several teachers were having at the end saying, what can we do about this? These kids are not bringing anything. I was like, well, I actually have a system that's working well. The problems you guys are having in your classrooms are not in my classroom. And so I think that really shows when we have high expectations, our students rise to meet them. And that also helps them be better and develop these good habits for the future. One more essential that I think can go either way, kind of like a form, I don't have an actual version here, has to do with seating charts. And I think with seating charts, there's a couple different approaches. I started out, when I started teaching, making seating charts before the first day of school. They were usually like alphabetical, so it didn't take me too much time because I didn't know who the kids were. However, I did shift to not making seating charts until after the first week later on. The reason being, I want to get to see who kids choose to sit by. I want to get a sense of the social dynamics that are going to happen in my class. And even though it could make things a little bit more chaotic, it's amazing clarity to find out right away, I need to keep these 2 separate, or this is not going to work. You can learn right away, and then when you have that first seating chart and then future seating charts, you know who you need to separate. In these situations, I tell my students it's a test. I would tell my students, look, prove to me that you're making good choices about who you sit by, because I am learning right now. I am observing you, and if I see things that I don't like, then I'm not going to put you there the rest of the year. And so that's really helpful, as well as you can get a sense of where students ideally like to sit. By not having one right away, you can ask, okay, like I put this on like a student inventory. Do you have any vision challenges? Do you have to be in the front of the room to see better? And I talk through that with the kids while they're sitting in my classroom. Can you see where you're sitting? And if there's any other needs, like if a student needs to be closer to the door or away from the windows, I've had all different types of requests. So if you actually leave the first couple days open, not only is it a social experiment, but you can also take care of those issues. I know I went through a lot of different forms today, but I'm hopeful that you're feeling confident and ready to use some of these different forms in your classroom, whether you like some of the versions I have or you want to create your own. It doesn't really matter, whatever is best for you. This is going to really help streamline your year. And even though, again, it's fun doing all the decor, don't forget about these organizational things so you have a really successful system, and then you're not scrambling when your administrator needs something, or it's parent-teacher conferences, or you need certain records. You've got what you need. Let me know if you've got any questions about any of the forms that I talked about or things related to setting yourself up for success. You can check out some past videos over here and subscribe to the channel up here. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.